hello everyone. My name is Ciru Ngigi and welcome to Mine is a Common podcast. And I hope you're breathing. I hope you're eating well. I hope you're sleeping. I also hope you're sanitizing and that you are vaccinated, either partially or fully vaccinated. It's very important. So this is a podcast that brings women and non-men together so that we can talk about our lives. We talk about beliefs and practices and how these things have an impact on our lives and how they affect us. Right? Mm-hmm. So today I am joined by a very good friend of mine. I am so excited that she's here. She's a therapist living and working in Nairobi. Yes, and she's also a registered and paid member of the Beehive. She is also very passionate about women healing from trauma, manipulation, abuse, and nonsense. Sometimes we need to heal from nonsense, and I'm so excited that she's here. We made a promise on the streets of Zuckerberg. I made a promise, and then she jumped in and said she was going to help me fulfill that promise. And today we're going to talk about purity culture. I'm very excited about it, and welcome.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for being here. I haven't even said her name, so I will let her say her name.
Oh, my name is Ciru Ngigi, a therapist living and working in Nairobi.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything else I ever say about me on the internet nowadays. Therapist living and working in Nairobi.
Yes.
That's about it.
And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And
thank you for agreeing to my bulldozing. Like, if you're going to have a conversation about purity culture, I will be there.
Yes, and you said I will be there. And then I said, you know what? I will have you there. So now let's just begin with the definition of purity culture. When we talk about purity culture, what does that mean?
I had entire notes typed out in my mind.
Okay.
I can't remember them.
Mm-hmm.
But purity culture is basically a system of thought or a doctrine that began as a response to the sexual liberation. Hey, Nyeri ancestors, how are you? So to the sexual liberation of the 1960s, because the parents who were children in the 1960s and the 1990s, or rather the people who were raised by people who were the sexually liberated ones of the 1960s, by the 1990s now had teenagers and young people of their own. And they were afraid because AIDS was at an all-time high. And this is in the States. These are statistics, or this is information about America. So they now had children of their own who were going into teenagehood, into young adulthood. And purity culture began as a response to that, okay?
Yeah,
so what purity culture is an attempt to have laws or to have codes of conduct that govern dating and sexual behavior, loosely built on biblical ideation, but very deeply entrenched in the church.
Yeah.
And I will say why loosely built, because the Bible doesn't say too much about purity culture the way purity talks about purity culture.
Yeah, and
the way purity culture talks about purity culture is not the way the Bible talks about sex.
Yeah.
So, but I think I've answered the question. I
Yes,
don't even know if
you
I've
have.
answered the question.
And you've even gone a bit into now the next thing I was going to ask about the origins of the purity culture.
Yeah.
Yes.
So it was like a knee-jerk response because at the time, these people were having children. They, like I've said, AIDS was a pandemic was a pandemic in the States then.
Yeah.
And so these were parents who were racking their brains trying to figure out how do we get these kids to not have sex and to have stable marriages or whatever it is we believe is right. And you know how the evangelical Bible Belt thinks and functions.
Yes.
And so in one of the meetings at church, I think it's called Life Church, if I'm not wrong, in the 1990s, a youth pastor,
it's always the youth pastors.
It's always the youth pastors. It's always the youth pastors.
Yeah.
If you're a youth pastor, side eye. But a youth pastor said, let's have a true love waits campaign.
Okay.
And so this is in 1990. By 1992, they had signed up 10,000 people to True Love Waits.
Okay.
I need to remember the name of the youth pastor at some point.
And it's not Rick Warren. Rick Warren was the purpose guy. Oh, anyway, no, I don't know.
I'm side-eyeing you because you are...
I don't know.
I'm side-eyeing you because you're the one who was in charge.
I don't remember.
It's like, no, sis, no, let's not try. Let's
Okay,
not try.
I'm done.
And so after
It's not recorded.
we will watch this and laugh. So afterwards, they have this True Love Waits campaign, and they have symbolisms for it or symbols for it.
I got
So
an
there's-
ATM for a true love thing.
Yeah, so
Until you cash it on your wedding night. I got something like that, but I
yes,
didn't
so
know
they
which
would have
pastor it was.
pledges, they would have
Yes.
rings, and then they would have purity balls. So
My
the purity
God.
balls were like daddy-daughter dances, and then like the dad and the daughter would have like a pledge about her own sexual purity and whatnot. Which, when you think about it, is a bit
very
sexually.
weird.
It's very sexually predatory.
Yeah.
It's
Because
strange
where is your
behavior.
father Nini, policing your
Like,
sexuality and
why
your
is your
purity?
father in your vagina? Like, can he mind his business?
Yeah.
Other men are looking for money. What are you doing in your daughter's vagina?
Right?
Anyway?
Yeah.
This part should not go on anybody's internet.
Yeah.
So
And the TI of it all. But okay.
yes, exactly the TI of
Of it all. Yes.
It's abusive behavior, and it's
Yeah.
very controlling. And so there were these cards and pledges and whatnot, and people would wear rings that would say they have chosen to stay celibate or to stay a virgin until they get married. And so purity culture takes on a life of its own. I don't think the people who began it really had a roadmap to where it
Yeah.
would go. The magnanimity of it was
Yeah.
also informing them on how
Yeah.
to continue. And then Josh Harris happens on the scene, I
Okay.
think in 1996, if I'm not wrong. And he writes this book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye.
Ooh.
So
All right.
I read that book this year for the first time because
This year of all years.
let me tell you why.
Okay.
So a therapy client of mine told me to understand where the Christian women who are coming into your practice
Okay.
are coming from
All right.
with their sexuality, I think you need to read this book. So I read that book, and anybody we're friends. So
Yes.
anybody who knows me knows how fast I inhale books.
Yes.
It took me almost 3 months to finish that book. Me who reads a book in 3.5 hours.
Because I can understand why it
was
would take you that long.
such
Yes.
a difficult book to read. And when I was done reading it, I just kept thinking, I'm so sorry to everybody who had to think like this.
Yeah.
Josh Harris later came out and
And said
said
it was a lie.
that he didn't believe, no longer believed in some of the things he was preaching when he was younger. He felt a lot of his theories were half-baked. He ended up getting a divorce from
He
his
did,
wife.
yeah.
But
But the harm has already
he
been
asked,
done.
yes, he asked for the book to no longer be published. So he did try to do all the things he could do
In his
as
power.
Josh Harris,
Yeah.
within his power as Josh
Yeah.
Harris. He did try to do it. But on the other hand, is all these people who grew up having, and by growing up, I don't mean like childhood, but I mean having an ideological coming into oneself
Yeah.
with the theory that God is somehow angry at you for enjoying your body. First, that there's something wrong with you and your body,
Yes.
and that you and your body and your desire for sex are inherently sinful. And then as a result, there's something wrong with this inherently sinful you
Yeah.
that shouldn't be shared with another person. And what that creates in people is that you approach life from a lot of fear.
Yes.
So to this day, I still see conversations online and whatnot from, especially for the few Christian circles I still maintain, of people talking about how, sometimes you can be inviting spirits into yourself when you're sleeping with somebody.
And soul
I'm
ties.
and soul ties.
Yeah.
And I keep wondering, is everybody else possessed except you? Because at this point,
You-
it's you I'm looking at.
You need to explain. You need to.
is everybody else having
show
a
your
soul
working.
tie?
Yeah. Yeah. show your working.
Show just cause.
Show your working. Explain to us how the soul ties work.
How did these soul ties happen?
Yeah.
And people are like, you can sleep with a person and then you're forever bound to them.
Okay.
Because of the verse that says something like, if you sleep with a harlot, you're unified with a harlot. And then there's
So if you
also
sleep with a
something else.
billionaire, are you a billionaire as well?
Thank you very much.
But
also there's this question that I keep asking. Okay? Now, after you've had several sexual partners, who will the devil go to when I join Illuminati?
I also asked that question. Like,
when I become a devil Oscar and I need money,
you need to be Illuminati.
who is the devil going to go to?
Yeah, who? Is it my problem or is it their problems? What is happening?
All the men that are supposed to be having my soul.
Yeah.
Which one will the devil go to first?
Who has my soul? That's true. That's
anyway.
Yeah.
My mom will probably watch this and just be like, "What child did we raise?"
Hi, mom.
Hi, mom. How are you, sweetheart?
Yeah.
So, but that was basically how purity culture began. To give a generalized overview.
Yeah.
So, of course, and then in Kenya, what purity culture did is it came upon a Kenya where the church, and we always give credit to the person who really worked hard and got ostracized so much for doing his best to make the church or to make Christianity more accommodating and less judgmental. And his name is Pete Odera.
Okay, yes.
Give that man his flowers every single time you mention a person who, even things like playing guitar in church were things Pete Odera was getting flack for in the 80s and 90s. So please, that man changed the way church functions to this today.
Pete Odera has found himself in a sexual purity conversation just like that.
But no, he's a pastor to this day. But what was happening is, so the groundwork that people like Pete Odera had been laying was now, or the tracks that had been laying were now ready for some trains. And so you would find urban churches were now becoming a bit more loose. So there were also...
Women could wear their hair like a certain way, yes.
People were now wearing a little bit of makeup or whatever. Young, what we would call kids or like teenagers and whatnot were having were able to have programs in church designed for them, you know. Such, there were youth programs now and there were youth departments in churches now.
It was not the time when people were dancing and were having dance groups and everyone was wearing. And Makoma, hi Makoma, I mean, no, not hi, but yes.
Yes, Makoma was a whole thing.
I know.
There was a group, called Olova, that was a dance group in Nairobi that changed the way praise and worship is done to this day.
Yes, and also what Kubamba was doing at the time and all that.
Kubamba came a little bit later, but you know.
But the foundation has been built for them to now, yes.
So all of this is happening, and then at the same time, the Kenyan church had also refused to listen to John Gatu when he said, and he said this immediately after independence, he said, it would be better if the Kenyan church was to exist without external dollars or without external funding.
Okay.
So that one can be able to have a Christianity that is authentic to the Kenyan African experience.
Yes.
We didn't listen.
In fact, we didn't.
So in the 90s, we were at the height of donor money and church planting.
And donor money was coming from these white evangelicals.
From white evangelicals.
These white evangelicals who are now talking to us about how to become, especially for women, how to dress, what to wear, how you can come to church.
The sermons were about submission and about sexual purity. And it soon became all youth groups talk about.
Yes.
And, in urban churches in Nairobi.
Yeah.
It soon became, you could rotate around other topics, but eventually you would just end up at sexual purity.
And submission.
For
newly married couples.
For newly married couples.
Yeah.
And to this day, I have seldom heard a sermon on marriage that did not primarily focus on either sexual purity or submission.
Now they are saying that submission will come naturally if you love someone, but we'll talk about that later.
Submission will come naturally?
Will come naturally when you love someone. When a woman is loved, she submits. There's a particular pastor I am quoting, but when a woman is loved correctly, she naturally submits.
I don't know whether it's submission as much as it is trust, because truth be told, if you're in a space where you're being well taken care of and a person is actually treating you with kindness, trusting them will be easy. And therefore, if they have proven to be a trustworthy person, and they ask you to trust them on yet another journey, you don't have too many light bulbs going off in the red zone in your mind. And that's not necessarily submission. I think that's just human relations. Trust. In the same way,
but it's the insistence of the word submission. It's that insistence.
And for me, I always say, if you have to explain something with a language of slavery, maybe you shouldn't have
Maybe
to
you
tell us
exactly,
about it.
exactly.
Maybe it shouldn't exist.
Yeah. So I also want to find out what is the harm, like what harm comes with the purity culture.
So much. So first of all, I am 500% convinced this is the hill I'm dying on. Kenyans don't have sex.
Okay.
Kenyans have pressure.
Okay.
Kenyans have pressurized relations. Kenyans do not have sex. I'm staring right into whatever camera is going to be looking at me. Okay? And I feel like purity culture created a system in which you had just two options.
Yeah.
It was either you became openly defiant to purity culture, and so you had sex either when you were not feeling ready or with people who were not honoring your body or who were not treating you well because you were proven a point.
I can do this
Or,
thing.
yeah, I
Yes.
can do this.
Yeah.
Or you were stuck in purity culture, and because you're stuck in purity culture, your ideas of sex were very distorted and very guilt and shame ridden.
Yes.
But even the people who are in defiance mode are still having sex from a point of guilt and
Yeah.
shame because you have to defy.
And it's
I
also
mean, what
not
are you
a
defying,
healthy,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
It's not healthy.
Yeah.
And then it also meant that people approach each other with all this fear, or people approach their romantic lives, especially, with all this fear. Because on one hand is a purity culture that says you should avoid anything that could possibly make you heartbroken, because that was basically the crux of
Was it really
A Kiss
about
Dating.
heartbreaking?
Just wait.
Yeah.
It was really the crux of the A Kiss Dating Goodbye
Yeah.
book, where it's like, if you were heartbroken, or if you had given your heart, quote unquote, to many men, then your heart was not available for your husband, or your heart was. So it was even talking
tarnished.
about how dating. Yeah, it was tarnished.
It was tarnished,
So it was
yeah.
even talking about how dating wasn't a good idea, only courtship, and the ways in which he described this courtship just made absolutely no sense. And it was supposed to be holy, and the version of holiness that was being described was, this sounds a bit cultish,
Yeah. Yeah.
And the God that was being preached was a God that was clearly very annoyed with what people do with their private parts.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering, a God who does not want you to be catching good orgasms and living in ecstasy, maybe that is not a God who's big enough for your trust. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
But
And it's like a
you
God,
might need a
and
bigger
it's like
God.
and it's like a God who's like, he's waiting for you to make a mistake.
Yes.
He's not interested in all the good things that can happen
Happen
to
to
you.
you,
It's
exactly.
just, I'm waiting for you. I want you to please make a mistake.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so people approached their romantic lives, and I feel like people still approach in Christendom, in every place in Christendom where purity culture set foot, people still approach a lot of their romantic relationships from a point of fear,
Yeah.
and from a point of what I'm doing is wrong,
Yes.
and from a point of I can't give myself too many options because that too is wrong. Or there's a sense of there's something innately wrong with me, or the idea of original sin that became a very heightened concept during the days of purity culture. So there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And because there's something wrong with me, I cannot trust myself to make any kinds of decisions because I'm inherently wrong.
Yeah.
And then it became such that the Christian walk was so focused on what people do with their private parts that the rest of Christian doctrine that has existed for Christians of many generations and that has kept the faith alive in the ways the faith has been kept alive, fell into some background.
Yeah.
And we now no longer have conversations about, for example, the idea, like for me, one of the most beautiful stories, I'm going to segue into, like I really will just segue into nothingness that has
The
nothing
woman
to
with
do
the issue
this.
of blood.
Not that one.
Okay.
One of my favorite stories is actually the story of Abraham.
Okay.
Abraham leaves his people based on his intuition. I find it particularly interesting that Christianity today, especially post-purity culture, because of the totalitarianism that purity culture demanded of Christianity, we no longer have conversations such as, in the same way Abraham had his intuition and listened, or had a voice within himself and listened, you too listen to what's inside you. We don't have those conversations as whatever is inside you is the voice of God. We now have conversations that say you are wrong, and you
Yes.
always need to refer to A,
Yes.
Christian culture, and then B, biblical interpretation by Christian culture,
Yeah.
okay, current Christian culture, to then decide for yourself what's right for you.
Yes.
And I think that's a problem.
And then now when you add mommy
Yeah.
and daddy, then
Yes.
it becomes now a whole complicated
So
situation.
people are consistently living in all these boxes of guilt and shame and whatnot. And it also means people just generally don't have good sex. And I personally think pleasure is a prayer. And when you're not fully praying in pleasure, okay, that's a conversation we're going to have some other day. But pleasure is a prayer.
Yeah.
And when that prayer is not met, there are nothing. I will not be those people who claim that adverse things are going to happen to you. But I will say that the prayer that is made possible by pleasure is one that is creative in nature and one that adds life to you.
Yeah.
I can say that.
All right.
It's not to say you're not going to live a good life, but it is to say...
But it could be better.
It could be
Much,
so
much better.
much
Much better.
So
yeah.
there's that as well.
Yeah.
Did I even answer your question?
You've answered the question and you've gone into the next question, which I was going to now.
okay.
Yeah, I was going to ask you how purity culture shows up in our lives. And you've talked about the guilt. You've talked about not even trusting in yourself, not believing in yourself, because already you've been introduced to the fact that you could be wrong. In fact, you are already wrong.
You're wrong.
You're
and
wrong.
There's something wrong with you.
Yes.
And if you don't think you're wrong, it's because you're disobedient to God.
And it's because you
your
lack
heart
the
is full
fear of God.
pride. Your heart is full of pride.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
And it also means when you're going through your dating journey. So, for example, you waste a lot of your own time. This is something
Yes.
else. You waste a lot of your own time. Excuse me, because purity culture came with the idea that you're supposed to, I don't know, magically meet this one person and date this one person and this one person.
And they're going
only.
to complete you and be
Yes,
everything.
and then
Yeah.
you marry them, and which takes away the purpose of dating. So to this day, we still have people who are, and all of us, to be honest, if we're all honest,
Yeah.
if you were raised in the Christian circles, all of us have done this thing
Yes.
where you have dated somebody for 2-3 years and concentrated on them and them only,
Yeah.
when dating is supposed to be about exploring all your options,
Yes.
to see that you pick the
And
one
also
that's the
exploring
best fit.
yourself.
Yes,
What
and
does
exploring
it-
yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it's not just exploring yourself sexually. Some people do it, some people don't.
Yeah.
For me, the question on when to have sex should be left up to individual comfort.
Yes.
I'm a firm believer in soft life, and my
Yeah.
version of soft life is, first and foremost, is your peace protected
Yes.
in this?
Yes.
If it doesn't protect your peace, maybe you want to take a pause on it.
Yeah.
And so when I look at it that way, I say, with modern dating now, people are giving up 2-3 years of their lives, and then you break up with this person, and then you go, you give another 2-3 years of your life with this person, and then you break up with this person, and then you go, you have another 5 years, and then, and then after that, you have a Christian singles meetup because, oh my goodness gracious, these children
People
are not getting married, and now they're 35.
Yeah.
What are we going to do? And I'm thinking...
And it's a crisis now.
It's now a crisis that
crisis,
people are not getting
yeah.
married. I'm thinking, and so many people desire love. I wish it was a crisis if people didn't desire
Love.
marriage, love
Yes.
and marriage.
Yeah.
No,
Well-
wait. I wish it was such that people didn't desire love and marriage. But now that people actually do desire love and marriage, and then here we are telling people that in purity you can't be seeing more than one person at a time because you need to be proving your commitment at the beginning, as opposed to you need to be exploring all your options
Yeah.
and making sure that whatever decision you make is, one, well informed. Okay.
Yes.
So instead of learning 3-year-long lessons from each of your exes, why not just learn in those 3 years? Had you dated 15 people, you'd have learned at least 15 different kinds of lessons. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Even
Yeah.
if you don't get married, you'd still have made good friends.
And your life has been full. Like you have
Exactly.
lived. You have actually
Because that's the
lived.
other thing.
Yeah.
That's the other thing. I say, especially in Kenya, I don't know how it is in other places, but
Yeah.
I know in Kenya, relationships between men and women are either friends with benefits or sponsorships or romantic.
So where is the
Very
health?
few
Which ones
times-
are actually genuinely
Very
healthy
few times
Yeah.
do people actually have healthy, boisterous, loving friendships with people of the other gender.
Yes.
Or, of all the other genders that exist, because there's always a sense of, so where's this going? after a couple of conversations, where is this going? I'm like,
But it
that's
doesn't have
way
to
too
go
much
anywhere.
pressure. So that's
Yes.
also another effect.
Yeah.
The pressure that people now come into friendships or come into acquaintances.
Or even with the fear that, so what if this becomes a sexual thing? Then now what are we going to
Yes,
do?
then now what are we going to do? And it's
Yeah.
like, you'll just keep doing what you're doing.
You'll just continue being friends. You'll just continue being friends.
living your life,
yeah.
man.
And also, how does
Yeah.
it show up now when we are dating? How does it show up? How does the purity culture show up in our now in our romantic relationship? Whether you're married or whether it's a dating situation.
I think because of the guilt of sex, people don't really allow themselves to enjoy each other's bodies beautifully. And people don't allow themselves the beauty of trusting another person with their body because they've grown up hearing how that trust makes you unholy, annoys God, and also is proof, your desire to even have that trust is proof that there's something wrong with you as per the laws of God.
And then there's also, sometimes I feel like there's like a scarcity mentality with purity culture. Stay with me. You hear someone will say she has had so much sex, she's now damaged goods, or whatever it is she had is now gone. There's no heart left to love. There's no feelings left. We used to hear that a lot. So you're scared of using yourself. It's like you're applying yourself.
Yeah, there's only so much of you.
And I love the people who said, see Sabuni. They didn't know what they were doing, but it was...
My answer to that is always, if the Bible does say that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit or whatever the Bible says about it, it's been a long time since I read the book. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
But if the Bible does say that, temples, I think,
they welcome everybody.
Yeah, and I feel like temples become holier with the more visitors they have.
Because you end up sharing the God
they
and you
create
share
more reverence. So
yes,
hold on.
This is her. This is. All right. So also, how does the purity culture now manifest? Because you've said something about Kenyans not knowing how to have sex. So how does purity culture show up in our sex lives and even sexuality?
There's a lot of fear. I don't know how else to put it other than
and a lot of guilt.
There's a lot of fear. There's a lot of guilt. There's a lot of shame. And even when people, it's not to say that people are not adventurous. It's to say that people are not self-honoring. There's a concept I can only refer to as sex as self-harm.
Okay.
Which is where you are having sex to ignore yourself or to be violent against yourself with proving points.
Or to defy
to defy society with your own body.
Yeah.
And it's like, honestly speaking, we as society are not that, we're not that important in your life, Abega.
We shouldn't be that important.
Slow down.
Yeah.
Have sex with people who really honor you, who really take care of you. Be in spaces where you can even give yourself permission to be the person who's doing these things for others.
Yeah.
So I feel like I don't know how to put it without being politically incorrect. Or rather, I don't know how to put it without...
This is our comment. It's our time to say things.
Yes, but I also do not want to be that person who said, all Kenyans have bad sex. And then everyone's like, oh, hey, excuse me, whatever's happening in your bedroom is happening in your bedroom by yourself.
But if the national sexual culture is unhealthy...
Yes, I do think
there will definitely be outliers and people who have gone against the grain and people who have healed and people who have had therapy. But we know that
sexual culture is unhealthy. It's very extractionary. It's very use me, I use you kind of thing.
Someone called it masturbatory. I was like...
Do you know what masturbatory reminds me of?
No.
Acoustic.
No, there's someone who said that. Someone said it's like you're here, but you're not here. I'd rather be alone, but I'm tired of being alone, so I'll have you so that I can be alone anyway.
Yes, that kind of thing. So it's like, I'm using you for me, but I'm not seeing you.
But exactly.
For you, and I'm also not sharing myself with you.
You've talked about mindlessness and the lack of awareness when having sex.
Yeah.
So I'd want to know, what does sexual freedom look like?
First, I'll say that mindlessness is for a person who is existing in the confines of purity culture, the only other option is guilt and shame.
Yeah.
So to be able to have sex for a lot of people, something has to be blocked.
Yeah.
Which is why sex is very mindless.
Yeah.
For many people.
Yeah.
What was your question?
What does sexual
What
freedom
does sexual freedom look like?
Yeah.
And so sexual freedom sexual freedom looks like being able to have sex in authentic ways to who you are, doing things that honor you, or being with people and in spaces where you feel honored.
Yeah.
And also listening to your body and listening to yourself.
Yeah.
I think also because of how the defiance culture also started, and also how the idea that, you know, after you get married, now just go have sex, and if your husband asks you for sex, and this someone was never preached to husbands.
Yeah.
It was always, if your husband asks you for sex,
You can't
then
say no.
you can't say no.
Yeah.
And it was never preached to husbands that if your wife asks you for sex, you can't say no.
Yeah.
Not that it would have been a safe sermon to preach, to be honest,
Yeah.
but there's a sense of obligatory sexual activity, especially in long-term relationships
And marriages.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes, and this, I sometimes I feel that this obligatory behavior where long-term relationships are concerned, has also spilled over to the space of interest. So there's a general feeling that if a man especially, is interested in you, and I know that this conversation has existed in heteronormativity,
Yes.
because sexual purity, the sexual purity movement
Was between the men,
Yes,
yes,
was
and
very
women.
heteronormative in the way it moved.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I apologize to everybody for that.
Yeah.
So what was I saying? The feeling of the obligatory nature of sex then spills over to the idea that if a man likes you, then you're obligated to say yes, or you're obligated to respond.
Yeah.
Because also there was a scarcity you're talking about,
Yes,
which is
yeah.
there's only this one person you're supposed to be with. So you can't even say no to options that don't make sense to you.
And you should also feel privileged
Yeah,
and honored.
yes,
and
because look at them looking at you.
Yeah, he's looking at you. Yeah.
And it's like, you know, your one chance could pass you by and there was only one shot sort of situation. And so there's also that kind of pressure. And that kind of pressure also puts unnecessary pressure on the nature of the relationship,
Yeah.
and the speed with which it moves forward, and all of those types
Because
of
you're
things.
afraid of sinning, so you must move quickly so that you can now.
Yes.
Marriage will give you the freedom to have the
Yes,
sex.
for some people.
Yes.
Or you're going to ignore red flags because, you know, bora mwanaume kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
I feel like sexual purity also in some ways lent in some ways lent
yeah.
to that kind of thinking.
Yeah.
And so there's also the feeling of obligation in how people have sex.
So does abstinence also count as sexual freedom?
Yes, there are people who, you know, come to an awareness of who they are and they realize maybe I'm asexual.
Yeah.
Or maybe I am in a space right now where it's not sharing my body in that way with another
Doesn't
person,
serve
and
them,
having
yeah.
them share their body with me in that way is not something I am particularly interested in right now.
Yeah.
And so abstinence allows you
Yeah.
to say, let me take a chill pill on it. Or some people say, can I take a chill pill, or can I take a pause on sex and then really learn who I am as a
Yeah,
person?
yeah.
And as I'm learning,
Yeah.
I can go back to sex with
Yeah.
a more authentic view.
And with more awareness and
with
mindfulness.
yes, and with more mindfulness.
Yeah.
And then when I'm having sex, I actually am doing it for my own pleasure, having known what my own pleasure really is.
Yes. So as long as it's not guilt or fear or any of those things.
Yeah.
So now because there's a lot of us that carry baggage from purity culture. We've been to church, we've left church, or we are still in there. But then we understand how harmful this culture is, and we want to unlearn it and recover from it. So what do we need to pay attention to when unlearning, recovering, and healing from purity culture?
I think your intuition, number one. I think also paying attention to the ways in which the shame and the guilt cause you to move through life.
Life
'Cause,
generally.
yeah, move
Okay.
through life generally,
Yeah, okay.
because it's not just your sexual relationships that are affected. It's also the kinds of friendships you pick for yourself because of the fear of how they would turn sexual or not.
Okay.
It's the business relationships that you either get into or don't get into.
Professional relationship,
Because,
yeah.
the professional relationships that you get into or don't get into because, nitaitwa malaya if I am the only woman in a table of men discussing XYZ. You
Or
know
if
my
you're a very
point?
successful woman, then you must have slept your way to the top.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's paying attention to the ways in which guilt, shame, and the narratives of sexual purity, and laced with all the undertones and overtones of patriarchy,
Yeah.
are informing your day-to-day decision making.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not to slight the fact that, or to ever even try to ignore the fact that it is still a very unsafe society for women. That is
Yes.
true.
Yeah.
Physically unsafe society for women, and
Yeah.
also emotionally and financially
financially,
unsafe
yes.
society for women, amongst many other spheres of lack of safety.
Yeah.
Not to slight that, but to say, to be more authentic to who you are as a person when you approach those spaces or those kinds of unsafeties, without ignoring yourself, b, shooing yourself out of the space, telling yourself, no, you get out, or judge it. And usually we shoo ourselves out of a space by judging ourselves or judging our own thoughts. It's like, no,
Yeah.
you can't think that, no, you can't say
Yeah.
that, no, you can't, or no, you can't let that happen, or you can't be like this with this person, that kind of thing. And so without shooing yourself out of a space, and also, especially for the men, I would call them to the question of, if you took a pause on the idea that to prove yourself against sexual purity and the culture of sexual purity, if you took that idea and said to yourself, you would prefer to be in a space where you are just learning women for women's sake, what kind of relationships have you locked yourself out of that you can now access because you have given yourself permission for a more authentic view and a more authentic relationship and a healthier relationship with
yeah.
women?
With women, yeah.
Yeah, so that it's not just I'm either smashing her or I'm about to, or
Yeah, like I'm saving her for later.
yes, I'm
Like
saving her for later. It's like, what
Yeah.
if you had relationships that were truly,
Yeah.
what kinds of friendships have you locked yourself out of? What kinds of spaces have you locked yourself out of? Because
And what kind of growth have
what
you
kind of
denied
growth
yourself?
have you denied yourself?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, Ciru, thank you so much for coming. Thank you for saying yes to this conversation and for honoring the promise we made to the peoples. And especially for opening our eyes and our minds to the fact that sex is not just something we do with our clothes off in a room in secrecy and in guilt and everything. It doesn't end there. It also shows up in how we live, how we respond to each other, and how we relate to one another, how we see ourselves, how we move in the world, especially as women. You know, sometimes if you have too much sex, you might feel guilty or like you're defiant or like you're better than other people. There's all that, but we will have a part 2 sometime, or I mean, who knows?
Yeah,
Who
who
knows?
knows?
Yeah, who knows? So thank you so much for coming. Thank you for being here, and thank you for and thank you for being a teacher of love. I should have introduced you as a teacher of love. Thank you for that and because it is through that I've been able to now ask myself, okay, what kind of sex am I having? What kind of what is this thing? And
Yeah,
thank you for that. Yeah.
And I'd like to always, I say this a lot in all the spaces that I occupy, but I'd like to say it one more time. Please be very gentle with yourself.
Yeah.
Because when you're recovering from guilt and from shame, you can't use the same shame that took you there to
Yes.
get yourself out of it.
Yeah.
Be kind to yourself. Be gentle with yourself. Even as you're learning, as you're growing, as you're discovering yourself, discovering your body, discovering your own systems of thinking,
Yeah.
questioning things, or, as biblical people or
Yeah.
church people put
Yeah.
it, bringing down altars.
Yeah.
Whatever it is that you're doing in learning a more authentic way to live your life,
Yeah.
be very gentle with yourself as you do it.
Yeah.
I think above all else, whatever methods you employ, be it therapy or emotional freedom tapping or, asking yourself the hard questions or choosing to make different decisions or whatever, journaling, whatever methods you employ, because the
Yeah.
methods are many and diverse, and
Yeah.
whatever methods you employ, first and foremost, may they be on the bedrock of gentleness with yourself. This is
Yes.
a system that raised you for a long time.
Yeah.
And then this is a system that you are trying to defy and walk out of.
Yeah.
And it's a system you're trying to rearrange in your mind that is so deeply entrenched and so
Yeah.
deeply ingrained.
Yeah.
And so even as you're trying out new things, figuring out, what works, what doesn't work, even as you are giving yourself more room and more freedoms to do things, and to have healthier relationships to sex and with
One
each
another.
other.
Yes.
Even as you're doing these things, please be very, very gentle with yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, mine is just a comment. And I want to say that number one, when it comes to patriarchy, there's no, especially as women and non-men, there's no winning. This thing is rigged against us from the beginning. Like you can try to all the good girl things, all the following all the rules. It will not really save you. You will not save you. The best thing to do is, like Ciru has said, be mindful, be gentle. And if you're walking out of defiance, don't defy for the sake of defying. Defy because you know you deserve better than what the rules have conditioned you to think. Another thing I'd like to say is that I really hope that we encourage ourselves to imagine healthier sexual like a healthier sexual culture, one that is not built on guilt, is not built on shame, and is not built on fear. Because if you begin a conversation with guilt, shame, and fear, or you build a foundation of a culture with guilt, shame, and fear, then it means that we have no space to care for one another. It means we have no space to heal from sexual assault and sexual abuse. It means we have no space to even hold ourselves accountable to ourselves and even to our partners. It means that the whole thing is flawed from the beginning. And so I would like to challenge institutions that are very big on the purity culture, and this is specifically the church. It's not a fight, it's a challenge. I challenge you to scatter fear, guilt, and shame and have a more wholesome approach to sex, where we can talk about consent, we can talk about awareness, we can talk about responsibility, we can talk about care, and we can also talk about freedom, not guilting people and shaming people, and it doesn't really work. It hasn't worked, it's not going to work, and so I encourage you to dig into yourselves and find it within you to center care when you're discussing a healthier sexual culture. And for the people who are recovering from purity culture, myself included, we've been told to be gentle with ourselves, also be patient with ourselves, and we're going to be okay. As long as we are trying, we're showing up for ourselves, we're going to be okay. So thank you very much for watching and for listening. Thank you to everyone who has subscribed, to everyone who has commented, everyone who has volunteered to and wants to be on the podcast with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you for following me I am _Wanjiru on Twitter, Wanjiru Nguhe on Facebook, and Wanjiru Nguhe on Instagram as well. I welcome you to Mine is a Comment, and stay safe. And let us continue to imagine what freedom looks like beyond the rules that we've been forced to live with and to be. There's more on the other side of guilt and shame and fear. Thank you.